Hi, my name is Swan. I am the Special Collections Education and Outreach Librarian at Rauner Library at Dartmouth College. Rauner Library is the primary repository on campus for the rare books, manuscript collections, and archival materials of the college. We have about 140,000 rare books. We have about 7 linear miles of archival and manuscript material. We think we're the coolest place on campus, and we're glad that you're here because we want to show you some of those cool things that we have in our collections. Today I want to show you 2 really cool items from our collections. One is some stereoscopic cards and a stereoscopic viewer from the 1800s, and another is this medieval illuminated manuscript from the early 1400s. And these are great items because they sort of show you the breadth that we have in our collections here at Rauner. So this is a medieval book of hours from the early 1400s, probably around 1425. It was made in Paris, France. So a book of hours is a devotional text that is comprised of the hours of the Blessed Virgin. So it's a lay imitation of a form of monastic piety. There are the different hours of the day in here, which are religious for the church, indicate certain times of day that you reflect on Mary, on Jesus, on God, and it's sort of like a spiritual recentering. You sort of reorient yourself in terms of your relationship to God and the world. There are all kinds of things that can be in these books. It's really a choose your own adventure, or sort of a buffet in terms of selecting what you want in the book. There was a core number of texts that were in here, but then you could also change things up if you wanted. So say you're like, well, everyone gets Psalm 23, but I don't like Psalm 23, I really like Psalm 56, so put that in there instead. Or perhaps your father's patron saint was John the Baptist. So you say, well, make sure that John the Baptist's life story is in here, because every time I read that, I'll think of my dad and I'll pray for him. These books usually always had some sort of calendar in the front, indicating the days for the feasts of the saints. What's really fascinating about this book too is you also have images of the zodiac in the margins. Because nowadays we sort of think of astrology as like that's like in combat with or not compatible with Christianity. But back then it was just sort of a given, like the zodiac, the heavenly spheres, that sort of thing. So it wasn't a big deal. And it's made on animal skin or parchment. Sometimes you'll hear the word vellum. Vellum is like a really high quality form of parchment, so this is probably considered vellum. Everything on the page of every single page is done by hand. Scribes would work all day and maybe complete about 3 pages. So you can imagine how long it would take to make a book like this. Everything in the book is valuable in some way. Everywhere you see gold on the page, it is gold. They would hammer down gold until it was fine gold leaf, and then they would put an adhesive on the page where they wanted the gold to stay. They would place the gold leaf on it. They would rub it with something smooth and hard like a dog's tooth. They actually used a dog's tooth quite often. And then they would brush the gold leaf away, and the gold would stay where they wanted it to. The most expensive ingredient on the page, though, is not the gold, it's the blue ink. To make the kind of blue that they would need for Mary, the mother of Jesus' robes, they would have to import lapis lazuli, a gemstone, from Pakistan on the Silk Road. And then they would grind up the gemstone and float it in a special solution and then paint it on. So actually everywhere you see blue on these manuscripts, that for you should be the indicator that, wow, this is a really expensive book. And this would have been a really costly book. The only kind of person who could have afforded a book like this would have probably been a noblewoman. These kinds of books were often given as dowries. That's how valuable they were. It would be like, should we build a castle this year or should we buy a book? Let's buy a book. It was about personal devotion, but it was also about conspicuous consumption. Because you can imagine if you crack this thing open in church and there's all that gold, everyone who sees it's gonna know, wow, they have a lot of money. They have a book. Nowadays we kind of take books for granted. Back then they were a really valuable luxury item that only a very few people could have. So to sum it up, this sort of text was like a personal devotional book. It was something you would carry around with you. You would look through it and it would remind you of God and of your faith and the tenets of your faith. The next thing I want to show you is something called a stereoscope. And that's a device that was created to enable people to view stereoscopic cards. And this is a stereoscopic card. It has two images of the same item or viewpoint. You place it in this holder, and then you look through a double lens, and whatever the picture is of magically comes alive in 3D. These you may have seen in your childhood, or your parents maybe had kicking around when they were kids, these little red Viewmasters that you could put a circle slide on the top and click through. This is the predecessor to that. The stereoscopic cards were all the rage in home entertainment from the 1850s through the 1930s. So for about 80 years, more or less coinciding with the beginning of photography. As a public and popular medium. So here at Rauner, we have 13 boxes full of stereoscopic cards that you can come in and look at anytime you want. The bulk of our collection has to do with scenic views of New Hampshire, especially the White Mountains. However, as a part of that, we have a great collection that have to do with Hanover and the surroundings of Hanover. So if you want to get a sense of what Hanover looked like in 3D back in the late 1800s, you can come in and check these cards out. We have some wonderful cards in here of, for example, you won't be able to see this maybe very well, but this is of Ledyard Bridge, where there used to be a covered bridge instead of the bridge we have now. And there are all kinds of just fascinating scenes on all of these cards. You can see maybe what your house looked like if you live in Hanover way back in the day. You can find that street and check it out. So this is something that we have that we really love. There are many different types of stereoscopes. This one is actually invented in 1861 by Oliver Wendell Holmes, who was a poet. He was just a general polymath. He purposely did not patent this because he wanted it to be made available to as wide a variety of people as possible. Because stereoscopes were so popular, he wanted to make sure that everyone had this tool available without having to pay a lot of money for it. Another interesting little tidbit about the stereoscope, there are still people who avidly collect these, and they're still making them. In fact, the music band Queen, their guitarist Brian May is a freak for stereoscopes. And so he has this massive collection all his own, and he actually invented a stereoscopic viewer called the Owl viewer, and you can buy it on, he patented it and he sells it online, and you can buy it online. So there's a wide community of stereoscopic enthusiasts still alive today, and I know there are several institutions and libraries actually that have scanned all the cards and made them available online, so you don't have to go there in person. You can actually go online and then use your viewer to see their cards, which is kind of cool. I'm Morgan Swan at Rauner Library. Thank you for being here today. We want you to know that Rauner is open to the community. Anytime our doors are unlocked, you can walk in and say, show us something cool, show me something cool, and we will find something cool for you to see.